Well, when Trump came down the golden elevator in 2015 to announce his presidential run, what he says is, sadly, the American dream is dead. And I think that's correct. I mean, the American dream was this idea that anyone from anywhere could make it in America. You just had to work hard enough and read enough self-help books and you could do it. And Trump, of course, has sold himself on TV for decades as the embodiment of the American dream. But what you see in real life in America is that social mobility has frozen. It's much less now than in Europe. In Europe, your chances of rising from the bottom to the top of society is actually higher, especially in Scandinavia, than it is in the US. And so Americans have gradually begun to realize this. I mean, they see that what they've created is more a society of heirs, of people who've inherited. And Donald Trump is, of course, the embodiment of that. He got $413 million minimum from his father. Because you've had 80 years of wealth creation, you've had very little taxation of that wealth. Now you don't have to pay any tax on your inheritance at all. You just put the money in a trust in South Dakota, no taxes for centuries. So you have these people inheriting money down the generations and then fixing their place at the top of society, largely by buying private education for their children and making sure that nobody else can enter these hallowed halls. And Americans have begun to realize that, and so you see that faith in the dream story has evaporated. The Republican Party always sold the idea of the dream. Anyone can make it, we just have to get government off our backs. Now they realize that stopped selling and they've had to move to Trumpist nativism, which is we've got to keep these brown people out broadly and stop black people rising because otherwise there'll be nothing left for us. And if you look in surveys, Democrats, who are the large majority of Americans now, and the young both profess more belief in socialism than in capitalism. I mean, of course, what do Americans mean by socialism? I think it broadly means a European-style welfare state. You know, I interviewed Bernie Sanders, and that's sort of what he is selling. Medicare for all, Medicaid for all, and some system of social protection, some pension, more or less what we have in Europe. And someone like Sanders doesn't see himself as a radical revolutionary. No, he thinks he's at the mainstream of American society, and I think increasingly he's right. That it's not, Americans don't want the American dream anymore. They want the European dream. This much more kind of modest aspirations that we've set, but with a much more protective safety net. So what Americans want is a society that looks like Germany, the majority of Americans, of course. And of course, there will always be differences between Europeans and Americans on issues like gun control and abortion, where you have this large proportion of Americans who has very different views from Europeans. Economically, I think they want a kind of German dream, but what they're offered in real life is a society that doesn't look like Germany, that looks more like Brazil or like apartheid South Africa. So I say time to give up on the American dream and embrace the European dream instead.